The night the oven timer dinged like it used to when Luke was alive was the same night Lauren locked me out of the house we built together. That sound, bright, domestic, stupidly cheerful, cut through the December air like a joke told at a funeral. Charleston gets a particular kind of cold in mid-December, the kind that makes the marsh grass brittle and the sky feel like hammered tin. I was standing on the front path at 7:42 p.m., watching the porch light flicker, when I heard the deadbolt click on the other side of my own door. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Lauren opened the door only as far as the chain would allow. She held a folded letter like a trophy. "You're not on the deed anymore, Devin," she said, calm, rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. I didn't reach for the paper. I could already see the template, a fake correction deed. The chain rattled as the wind pushed against the door. Inside, the oven timer dinged again. I pictured my son at 10, barefoot on the same old tiles, stealing cookies too hot to hold, laughing like pain was something he could outrun. Luke died on May 18th, 2022 at 5:16 p.m. on Highway 17, 2 miles from the Ravenel Bridge. Every number from that day is carved into me, but this house, our house, was supposed to be what stayed standing after everything else fell apart. I kept my hands in my coat pockets, left the old brass key, right? A grocery receipt for milk, coffee, and lamp bulbs, $28.13. Life keeps moving, even when yours stops. Through the gap in the door, I could see the foyer trim where Luke and I marked his height from 2010 to 2018, pencil lines climbing until they didn't anymore. "This isn't your home," Lauren said, voice tightening. "You're welcome to collect your things from the garage." I boxed what I could. The letter fluttered down to the doormat. "Come on in." It read in friendly block letters. Irony has a way of showing up exactly on time. I bent not for the paper, but for a stray screw that had rolled under the porch rail months ago. A #8 pan head. People like Lauren miss details like that. Builders don't. "You changed the locks," I said, not asking. She crossed her arms. I had to boundaries. "It's December," I answered, because that was easier than saying anything else. "It sits my house." The $40 million didn't begin as a number. It began as Luke's life, insurance, stock grants, land we bought back when John's Island still felt like a secret. We set up the trust in 2011, Devin and Luke Callahan, co-trustees, because I've learned legacy isn't a handshake, it's paperwork. That trust deed is stamped and sealed in Charleston County Meeting Street, clerk's office, August 17th, 2011. I remember the weight of the stamp. "You can't be here," she said. Her chin trembled just slightly. Behind her, the kitchen light spilled over the mixer I'd given them as a wedding gift. A note with Luke's favorite cookie ratio. 3 cups flour, 1 cup brown sugar, 2 sticks butter, is still taped to the cabinet above it. My handwriting, my house, my son's life threaded into every corner. "Is there any of his in those boxes?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "I kept the essentials. The rest is clutter." The harbor wind carried salt and diesel up the street. A bell clanged in the distance. I rubbed the key in my pocket, the teeth pressing into my palm. The house looked back at me through its windows like it always did. "I'm going to the garage," I said. "You can go inside." The garage is on my side of the line. And it was. We poured the slab together. I carved my initials into the concrete under the workbench. The boundary pins are still buried under the azaleas. She doesn't know where the lines are. Not yet. She closed the door. The chain slid, the deadbolt snicked, the timer chirped one last time. Porch light steady now. The world outside didn't care that mine had shifted a degree off true. The garage smelled like sawdust, oil, and winter. My hammer still hung on its chalk outline. 2 banker's boxes sat on the floor. Her tidy handwriting, Devon, personal. The bland cruelty of a label. The first box held a photo of Luke at 22. Beam on his shoulder, sun in his eyes. The frame was cracked. Below it, my father's dog tags. A tape measure with brass casing. A cedar box I'd made for Luke's 30th. Empty now. The second box held cookie sheets, burned sugar stains from 2014 still etched into the metal. I set them aside and reached behind the compressor for the blue folder. I didn't need to open it. The trust papers were still there. That folder is a level always waiting, always true. My phone buzzed at 8:05 p.m. Unknown number. Please respect my space. This is a legal notice that you are not permitted to enter without my consent. Attached a fake PDF, no letterhead, no docket. Page 2 ended mid-sentence. She thought paper made it real. She forgot that real is recorded, witnessed, filed, and notarized. I wiped my hands, slid the brass key back onto the ring, and lifted my old toolbox. 38 pounds. I know its weight, like I know every nail in this house. I stepped through the sticking side gate. The magnolia overhead rustled like it had something to say. The letter still lay on the porch. I didn't pick it up. She thought she fought one because she changed a lock. She forgot who built the door, and whose name is etched into the foundation beneath it. Motel 6 has a smell. Not a bad one, just tired. A mix of cheap detergent, burnt coffee, and someone else's air freshener trying too hard. Room 214 had that smell. It also had a carpet so thin I could feel the concrete underneath with every step. I laid my keychain on the nightstand, my old brass house key still attached, and stared at it like it might suddenly start working again. Grief doesn't stab after the first year. It just sits heavy, like a wet coat you never take off. Luke's death had already broken me once. But this was different. This was someone trying to erase me while I was still breathing. Lauren's text came through at 9:17 p.m. sharp. Respect my space. This isn't your home anymore. No, hi, no, I'm sorry. Just a sentence with all the warmth of a doormat in winter. I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Then I opened the leather binder. Eleanor gave me back in 2011, the year Luke and I set everything up. The trust deed was right where it always was. In a plastic sleeve, corner tab labeled Trust, Property A. Luke's signature was clean, mine a little heavier from the callus in my thumb. Co-trustees. 50% ownership. Life estate rights. Recorded at the Charleston County Clerk's office with witness signatures. This wasn't a lease. This wasn't a handshake. This was bedrock. She didn't erase me. She just poked a man who knew every nail holding this structure together. The heater kicked on with a groan, and I slid the binder under the mattress like it was a weapon. In a way, it was. I spent years teaching Luke about foundations, how a house only falls when the ground beneath it shifts. She thought she could change the lock and shift the ground, but I poured that concrete myself. At 10:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again, not a text, a call. George Lynn. George doesn't set call late unless it despens important. Devon, he said without preamble. The alert went off. I sat up, hand already on the binder. Which one? The trust feeder account. $1.2 million wired out. Destination Belize. Fast. Same day the lock got changed. His voice was clipped. Accountant calm, but I could hear the urgency under it. Lauren didn't just want the house. She wanted to cash out. She was draining the foundation. Transaction timestamp? I asked. December 14th, 5:22 p.m., he said. Right before the rekey, flagged for review because the co-trustee signature field was blank. I froze what I could, but the wire sips in pending queue. 48 hours before it clears. I closed my eyes. 48 hours. Don't worry, George added. Sep already looped Eleanor in. Sep's drafting the first notice. When I hung up, the motel room suddenly felt smaller. The heater was still buzzing, but the air inside felt sharp. Lauren wasn't flailing. She was planning. That made her dangerous. I opened my wallet and pulled out an old photo of Luke, taken the year we finished the house. He was 22, sawdust in his hair, a nail gun slung on his shoulder like a kid showing off. We'd spent that summer laying tongue-and-groove flooring while music bled from the radio. I can still hear his laugh echoing off the beams. That house wasn't a structure, it was the last map of who we were, and she'd just declared war on it. The motel phone rang at 10:31. Only one person calls motel phones these days. Eleanor. She doesn't waste time with pleasantries either. Devon. I saw George Siff's alert. I figured. She can set move trust assets without your signature. If she sets trying to, she sets walking straight into breach territory. She sips not trying, I said. She sips already started. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Then we start too. At said I'll have a draft tot row ready by next week. But Devon, you still need to stay calm. This is about precision, not fury. I said, calm, I said, though my thumb had gone white from gripping the phone. She sips not just stealing money, she sips stealing my son Das last piece of the world. There was silence on the line. Then Eleanor Sepsis' voice softened just a fraction. Then let Sepsis make sure she doesn't Sepsis get away with it. I hung up, turned off the TV I hadn't been watching, and leaned back on the hard mattress. Above me, the ceiling light hummed. Somewhere 2 rooms over, a baby cried, and the world just kept going. I took out my notebook, brown leather, worn smooth, and started making a list. I've always believed plans shouldn't start with what you feel. They should start with what you can prove. December 14th, 7:42 p.m. Lock changed. $1 to MI. Wire alert. Belize, pending. Fake deed on porch. Turo, Eleanor, in motion. I added one more line at the bottom. Foundation doesn't move. When Luke was a kid, he used to sit on the workbench while I chalked out framing plans. Why do you always draw lines before you build? He'd asked once, swinging his little legs. Because I've told him, if you don't draw the lines, someone else will. Lauren thought I'd stumble out of that house and disappear into some quiet grief. She thought this was over. But I've spent a lifetime drawing lines, and I was about to redraw every one she thought she'd crossed. At 11:08, the heater kicked off. The silence felt surgical, clean. Grief makes you heavy. But revenge, the kind that isn't rage, the kind that's patient, that gives you a spine again. I picked up the key from the nightstand. Turned it in my hand. That door might not open for me tonight. But the foundation was still mine. And in 48 hours, the paper trail she started was going to lead her straight into a wall she couldn't break. December 22nd was a Friday. Charleston was gray that morning, the kind of sky that looks like it's made of steel and won't let the sun in. I sat at Eleanor's conference table at 9:13 a.m., the leather binder open between us like a loaded weapon. She tapped a single manicured finger on the trust clause highlighted in yellow. She can move a single brick without your signature, she said. Not a brick, not a dollar, not a deed. I leaned back in the chair. She already tried. That's why we're going to fix it, she said, voice even. Eleanor has been my friend for 30 years. She was at Luke's christening. She knows the house like she knows her own. But when she's in lawyer mode, she doesn't deal in sentiment. She deals in leverage. The paper in front of us wasn't a symbol. It was power. Co-trustee authority, filed and stamped. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb, the way some men trace old scars. She filed a correction deed SEP on December 20th. Eleanor continued, sliding a second sheet across the table. Its SEP's not valid. It has no co-trustee signature, no supporting affidavit, and it wasn't SEP recorded properly. But it shows intent. That helps us. That helps us. She's SISP's trying to get everything liquid, I said. That $1.2 million wire wasn't set a fluke. Eleanor nodded. And I have George pulling every account tie-in. We shall have a map soon. In the meantime, Daryl sips on standby. I looked up at that. Daryl? PI license still active. Knows how to follow paper trails and people. Daryl Brooks. We built the house's south wing together in 2013. He's the kind of man who notices which tire tracks don't match the driveway gravel. If Daryl was on board, this wasn't just legal anymore. It was strategic. Eleanor closed the folder with a soft thud. Devon, I need you to understand something. She sips already breached. That means everything she sips touched is under scrutiny now. If she thinks she can play fast and loose with $40 million, she sips about to learn what the word fiduciary actually means. I gave a dry laugh. She sips not exactly careful. Good, Eleanor said. Then she settled make mistakes. Outside, the wind was lifting off the harbor again. It has a particular whistle in December, like it's carrying warnings. At 10:27 a.m., Darrell pulled into the office lot in his old Ford truck, hood still dented from some job site years ago. He walked in with the same heavy step I remembered. "Heard you've got a rat problem," he said. No smile. "Something like that," I replied. Eleanor filled him in fast. "Wire transfer, forged correction deed, lockout." Darrell listened without interrupting, arms crossed, thumb rubbing the edge of his old carpenter's ring. When she finished, he said, "You want me to find out where she sits bleeding money?" "Yes," I said. "I want to know how far she sits gone." "Then I still start in Atlanta," he said. "Wellness business, dead venture. She owes people." I frowned. "How do you—" "She stiffed a supplier 3 years ago. I helped a guy down there collect. I know her scent." He gave me a long, steady look. "This isn't set just greed, Devin. She sets drowning, and she sets about to grab anything that floats." I didn't respond. He wasn't wrong. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, I got the voicemail. I was in the truck, parked outside the marina, watching the gulls fight over a sandwich someone dropped. Her voice came through the speaker, smooth but tight. "You stepper guest in that house." She said it like it was already decided. Like the law was just a detail she'd iron out later. I replayed that line 3 times. "Guest," as if the walls didn't still have Luke's fingerprints in the framing, as if the foundation didn't still carry our initials. Darrell sent the first photo that night. Lauren sitting at Harbor Cafe with a man in an expensive blazer, silver cufflinks flashing in the low light. Darrell Sipp's caption read, "Offshore fixer. I know the type." The man had the look of someone who lives on wiring instructions in shell companies. She wasn't just playing small, she was trying to take the house and the money offshore before anyone could blink. December 27th, 8:42 a.m. Eleanor walked into probate court and filed an ex parte temporary restraining order. Wrongful exclusion of co-trustee. High risk of dissipation. That sips the language that makes judges listen. She didn't yell. She didn't send threats. She filed paper, real paper. The kind that comes with seals and deadlines and sheriffs. That's how wars like this start. Not with shouting, with filings. At noon, we met at George's office. He had a giant monitor lit up with transaction trails. "She moved $1.2 million on the 14th, he said. "But there's another $380,000 queued for transfer to an LLC in Florida, controlled by someone named Keith Devereux. She filed for EIN under her name 2 weeks ago." Eleanor muttered something under her breath. "She sips setting up exit ramps." "She sips in over her head," George added. "It sips messy. Messy is good," I said quietly. "Messy leaves fingerprints." George looked at me with the kind of careful sympathy people use when they know it's Sep's person. "We can build a wall around the trust assets before she gets her hands on another cent." "In the house?" I asked. He hesitated. "That might get uglier." That night, I sat in the motel room with the blue folder open again. I'd laid out the trust deed, the original notary seal, the filing index number, all of it. December 22nd to 27 had turned into a blur of paperwork, strategy, and old friends, stepping into a fight they didn't start but weren't going to back down from. I thought about the house, about Luke's laugh echoing in the hallway, the smell of cedar dust in the garage, the foundation we poured side by side under a punishing July sun. Lauren thought a lock was power, but the real power was stamped, signed, and recorded 12 years ago in a courthouse that doesn't care about her Instagram followers. At 11:46 p.m., Darrell texted one line, "She sips lying to people about owning the place outright. Think she sips lining up a sale." I stared at the phone. A sale of the house where I raised my son, where every board, every beam, every nail was set by our hands. That wasn't greed. That was erasure. I leaned back, let the ceiling fan hum, and whispered to myself, "This is going to end in court." The quiet war had begun. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with old paper, steady hands, and the kind of patience people mistake for weakness. And by the time she realized what was happening, the foundation she thought she could steal would already be tightening around her like a vice. January 3rd, 2024, Wednesday. The wind coming off the Ashley River carried a cold that sliced clean through a man's jacket. At 8:27 a.m. I stood at the foot of my own porch again. Same cracked step, same flickering porch light, and watched a sheriff's deputy in a tan uniform post the TRO order against the frame. The blue notice curled slightly at the edges in the wind. TRO, Temporary Restraining Order. Charleston County Probate Division, Wrongful Exclusion. Immediate access restored to co-trustee. Lauren might have changed the locks, but the law just changed them back. The deputy tipped his hat. "You can go in now, Mr. Callahan." I stepped up the porch slowly, like someone returning to a battlefield still warm. My old brass key was cold against my palm, but I didn't need it this time. The deputy unlocked the door with the universal court-ordered access key and pushed it open. The house smelled like it always did in winter. Cedar from the baseboards, a faint trace of Luke's old cologne on the stair rail. Lauren had left candles burning on the kitchen island, some overpriced eucalyptus-scented thing, trying to make the house hers. But no matter how she dressed it up, she didn't build this place. I stepped inside at 8:33 a.m. sharp. The sound of my boots on the hardwood was the most satisfying noise I've heard in weeks. She was in the living room, already wide-eyed. "You can set just—" I lifted the blue paper. "I can." She stared at the sheriff's seal like it was a foreign language. Maybe it was. Paper has a way of talking louder than people who think charm can buy them everything. Her little correction deed she filed back on December 20th was sitting on the sideboard, neatly stacked next to a half-drunk latte. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. That document was already dead. No co-trustee signature. No legal weight. She shifted her weight, clutching her phone like it could protect her. "This isn't set fair." "No," I said evenly. "It sets legal—" She flinched like I'd hit her. But all I did was step past her into the foyer where Luke's pencil marks still climbed the trim. The house always remembers who built it. At 10:15 a.m., Eleanor arrived with two paralegals in tow. She wore her court heels, the ones that click like a metronome down hardwood floors. "Lauren," she said coolly, "you set her in breach. Devon Setch reinstated effective immediately, and the court will expect full cooperation." Lauren tried to smile, that performative smile she wore at charity dinners when Luke was alive. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said. "I was just trying to manage things." Eleanor didn't set blink. Transferring $1.2 million offshore isn't set management. It's just theft. Lauren went pale just for a second before the mask slid back on. "I was advised, not by us." Eleanor cut in. George had joined us by 11 a.m., holding a folder fat with printouts. He dropped it on the kitchen island with the weight of a hammer. Bank confirmed the $1.2 million wire. No co-trustee approval. Unauthorized. Belize intermediary. Flagged and held. Lauren Sepp's fingers tightened around her phone. "That Sepp's private." "It sets trust money," George said flatly. "Nothing about it is private." Eleanor looked at me then, the faintest nod. We weren't shouting, we weren't threatening. We were pulling out every nail she'd loosened. At 11:48 a.m., Daryl texted from Harbor Cafe. "She's Sepp's meeting fixer again, black blazer guy." "Same booth." Of course she was. "She Sepp's not just playing the victim," Eleanor said, scanning her own messages. "She's Sepp's desperate," I answered. Desperate people don't stop because a piece of paper tells them to. Eleanor tapped her pen on the island. "That's Sepp's why we escalate." The next escalation wasn't loud, it was methodical. January 3rd, 2:17 p.m. Eleanor's letter landed on her attorney's desk like a small earthquake. Breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized asset transfer, attempted exclusion of co-trustee, demand for accounting. This wasn't a family spat anymore. This was legal fire. That evening, I walked the perimeter of the house like I had 1,000 times before. The magnolia tree out front cast long winter shadows across the lawn. I could still see the places where Luke and I dug the foundation footers. Every shovelful had meant something then. It still did now. She watched me from the living room window as I checked the locks. Probably wondered why I wasn't screaming, but screaming's for people who don't know how to fight quietly. I wasn't going anywhere. At 5:09 p.m., George called. Devon. We found something. My stomach tightened. What? She filed for a private trust amendment with no legal counsel. It sits garbage, but she tried to change the distribution percentages. 80% to her, 20 to you, filed December 28th. I stared at the magnolia branches swaying overhead. 80 to 20. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted to erase Luke's father from his own legacy. Can we reverse it? George snorted. It sets not even valid, but it proves intent, and intent matters. I hung up and sat on the porch swing where Luke used to tie his running shoes before high school track meets. That old brass key was still warm in my hand. Lauren was inside, pacing, texting someone. Every con artist has a crack in their picture. Hers was believing a lock, a forged document, and a few offshore transfers made her untouchable. But cracks have a way of widening. At 7 p.m., Mara Ellis called. Lauren Sepp's former friend. We hadn't Sepp spoken in over a year. Devon, she said quietly. I need to tell you something. Sepp's been talking. A lot. Mara? I leaned forward on the porch swing. What kind of talking? She told me back in November. Mara said, voice trembling, that once she figured out how to deal with you, Sepp should sell the house and split the money before anyone noticed. The swing creaked. She said those words. Verbatim. I didn't know she said to actually do it, but she said has been planning this, Devon, for months. I could hear the weight in her voice. Not guilt, fear. People around Lauren always end up afraid. Would you be willing to say that officially? I asked. A pause. Then Mara Sepp's voice steadied. Yeah, I can. That was the moment the quiet war gained a witness. I sat outside long after the call ended. The magnolia branches moved against the cold sky, and the house behind me breathed like an old beast waking up. Lauren thought she could rewrite the story, but you can't erase the man who built the first chapter. She could smile for the cameras. She could burn candles in the kitchen, but the foundation didn't care about perfume or lighting. It cared about signatures, seals, witnesses, and the slow, unstoppable way the truth starts pulling at weak beams until the whole thing comes down. And I wasn't going to lift a finger in anger. I was just going to let the paper speak. January 15th, 2024, Monday. Charleston woke up to rain that came down like sheets of gray glass. I was sitting in George's office, a mug of burnt coffee going cold in my hand, when the storm outside got louder, and so did hers. It started with a headline. Widow forced from home by father-in-law. Front page of a local digital outlet, the kind that feeds Facebook like wildfire. The thumbnail showed Lauren in soft lighting, a beige cashmere sweater, eyes shimmering like she'd just cried for world peace. It was deliberate. Every part of that photo screamed victim. Beneath the headline, a short, neatly written piece framing me as a bitter old man trying to seize control of a grieving widow's inheritance. No mention of the trust. No mention of the $1.2 million wire. No mention of a TRO. Just a clean, sugary lie. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. George leaned over my shoulder. Sepp's got a PR firm, he muttered. They Sepp's good. They sutter loud, I corrected. Eleanor walked in a minute later, rain on her trench coat. She took one look at the screen and sighed. Of course Sepp's going public. Sepp's losing legally. So now Sepp's trying to win emotionally. The rain against the glass sounded like static. Can we shut it down? She shook her head slowly. You don't fight lies with noise. You fight lies with paper. At 9:42 a.m., Lauren went live on Instagram. I didn't watch the full thing, but Daryl recorded it. She sat in my living room, our living room, on the leather couch Luke picked out when he got his first big paycheck. Her voice trembled just enough to sound raw, but not enough to sound real. Sepp's trying to erase me, she said to the camera. Icep's just a widow trying to keep the only home I have left. But Hecep's got lawyers, money, power. The comment section lit up like dry pine catching a match. Stay strong, Lauren. This is disgusting. How can a man do that to his daughter-in-law? I watched that feed in silence. I'd built that house with my hands, and now she was using it as a stage. George closed the laptop gently, like handling a bomb. This is the part where most people panic. I am not most people, I said. Eleanor smiled faintly. Good, because Sif's just made her biggest mistake. What Sip's that? I asked. She forgot who actually has the receipts. At 11:30 a.m., Eleanor walked the trust deed down to the courthouse clerk and filed it into public record for the preliminary injunction hearing. Real paper. Real ink. Recorded under case number PD 2024-0172. That one move made every local outlet legally responsible for reporting both sides. Let her talk, Eleanor said. We make sure the facts are louder. By 1:05 p.m., George finished tracing the Belize wire. His monitor displayed a clean, damning flowchart. $1.2 million from the trust temporary Holden Shell intermediary in Miami offshore bank in Belize. Trail zips clear, George said, tapping the screen. This is open and shut fiduciary breach. At 2:22 p.m., Mara Ellis met Eleanor at the corner booth of Harbor Cafe. Rain still pounded the awning above them. She wore a black hoodie and sunglasses like someone trying not to be seen, but her voice recorder was in plain sight. She said it in November, Mara whispered. She said once she got Devin out, she said it'd sell the house and this start over somewhere warm. You sure of your dates? Eleanor asked. November 17th, Mara said. At brunch, I saved the text where she invited me. She tapped her phone. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. A time-stamped message lit the screen. It wasn't just hearsay, it was evidence. At 4 p.m., Daryl texted me from across town. Her fixer Sips's gone quiet. Guess he smelled smoke. Lauren's team wanted a clean story, but she'd built it on wet sand. At 5:18 p.m., the sheriff returned to the house. Not with cuffs, with enforcement. Thorough compliance inspection. That's what happens when you try to claim the sky is blue while the court has already painted it black and white. Lauren stood at the threshold, arms crossed, pretending confusion. This is harassment. The deputy, a man who Sipt had clearly done this 100 times, didn't even look at her. May Sipt are under court order to grant full access. That means him too. When I stepped inside, I didn't look at her. I looked at the floorboards, at the house, at the life she'd tried to turn into a prop. She followed me into the kitchen, voice breaking for effect. Devin, please, can we just find a way to live here together? I turned calm and quiet. You locked me out of my own home. Her mouth opened, closed. She couldn't spin that sentence. At 7:12 p.m., the local news picked up Eleanor Sepp's filing. This time the headline read, Trust dispute. Court order restores co-trustee access after alleged unauthorized transfer. Less romantic, more real. Daryl sent a screenshot of Lauren's Instagram comments around 8 p.m. Half of them were still calling me a monster, but cracks had formed. Wait, did she actually move $1.2 million? Why would the court give him access back if she Seps the victim? Something that's off here. That's how stories unravel. Not all at once. One loose thread at a time. At 9:47 p.m. Eleanor called. You did good today. I didn't do anything. You didn't set swing, she said. That Seps what matters. We let the paper hit back. I stared at the porch light outside the motel window. The rain had slowed to a fine mist. Her PR storm might have made a mess online, but inside the courthouse it was already crumbling. This wasn't about proving who could shout louder. It was about who had the better trail of ink and signatures. She could manipulate strangers on the internet, but the law doesn't scroll. February 1st, 2024, Thursday. The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and old air conditioning. I've been in plenty of courtrooms before, construction disputes, contract hearings, zoning fights, but this was different. This one was about my son's house. My legacy. Lauren was already there when I arrived at 8:50 a.m., sitting 2 benches ahead, wrapped in a cream-colored shawl like she'd wandered out of a Hallmark movie. Her lawyer, a slick man named Benton Price, leaned in close, whispering strategy like a snake warming around a branch. Eleanor sat next to me, calm, hands folded on a black leather folio. "Don't set rise to it," she whispered. "Not today, let them hang themselves." "I know," I murmured. "I just want to make sure they don't take what Setis left of Luke Setis' name with them." The clerk called the case at 9:07 a.m. sharp. Callahan versus Callahan, petition for removal of co-trustee. Lauren had filed an emergency motion, the kind meant to look explosive, dramatic. She wanted me stripped of my co-trustee authority. One swing, all power gone. Benton stood up first, voice smooth and confident. "Your Honor, my client has endured harassment, intimidation, and what we believe to be intentional obstruction by Mr. Callahan. He has leveraged his legal position to create an unbearable environment in what is," he gestured broadly, "her home." Her home. Those words buzzed in the air like a mosquito you can't swat. I sat still. That was the deal I made with Eleanor before walking in. Don't flinch. Benton kept going, painting me as an overbearing patriarch who weaponized technicalities against a grieving widow. He was good. I'll give him that. He made fiction sound like fact and wrapped it in a voice made for late-night political ads. Lauren even dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue. Not a tear, though, just performance. Then Eleanor stood, and the temperature in the room shifted. "Your Honor," she began, tone clipped, surgical, "we have before us a petitioner who has unlawfully attempted to transfer $1.2 million in trust assets offshore, filed a fraudulent correction deed, and unlawfully locked out a co-trustee actions which were remedied through a duly issued temporary restraining order on January 3rd. Mr. Callahan has not harassed anyone. He has protected the trust." She laid a single document on the lectern. Exhibit A, the original trust deed from 2011. Stamped, recorded, real. Denton tried to object. "Irrelevant to this motion. Relevant to every word you just said," Eleanor snapped back. The judge let it in. Eleanor leaned closer to the microphone. "My client is not an intruder. He is a co-owner, co-trustee, and legal custodian of these assets. And this," she lifted the trust deed slightly, "is the foundation of everything here. Callahan cannot remove him because she does not have unilateral authority to do so. Period." Benton shifted. Lauren's face twitched, just for a moment. A crack. I saw it. The judge, a tall man with rimless glasses, tapped his pen twice. "Miss Callahan," he said, turning to her, "why was the $1.2 million wire initiated without your co-trustee SEP's signature?" Her lawyer jumped in fast. "Your Honor, that was a misunderstanding." The judge raised a hand. "I didn't ask you. I asked her." Lauren Stutt's throat bobbed. "I thought." "You thought," the judge repeated. "But you didn't have authority." Her voice went small. "No." The gallery was silent except for the hum of the old vents overhead. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't have to. This wasn't about gloating. It was about exposing the scaffolding of her lies. Benton scrambled to recover. "Your Honor, regardless of the financial misunderstandings, the personal relationship between these parties has broken down completely. That in itself is grounds for removal of a co-trustee." Eleanor cut in like a blade. "There is no personal relationship clause in the trust agreement. This is not a dinner party. This is a fiduciary structure." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Motion to remove co-trustee is denied." Just like that. One gavel strike, one sentence. All her theater crumbled. But Lauren smiled, and that smile told me something important. She wasn't done. Outside the courthouse at 10:22 a.m., the February sun broke through gray clouds for the first time all morning. Eleanor walked beside me, flipping her folders shut. "That SEP's one front handled." "SEP's not going to stop," I said. "No," she agreed, "but now she has to get louder to be heard, and louder people make mistakes." George met us at the courthouse steps. He'd been running background checks while the hearing played out. You need to see this, he said, pulling a tablet from his coat. Lauren's offshore fixer wasn't just a middleman. He was tied to a chain of shell companies that had funneled investor cash out of Atlanta 3 years ago. Civil litigation still pending. She sifts is dancing with people who don't just care about her, George said. They still cut her loose the second she becomes a liability. She already is one, I said. At 1:40 p.m., Darrell called. He said been watching from a distance. She sets at the harbor again, he said. Same booth. Only this time no blazer guy. Just her and a laptop. She sets cornered. Cornered people bite. At 4 p.m., a message popped up in my inbox. Anonymous email. No subject line. Attached a screenshot of Lauren Sepp's text messages to someone saved only as KD. Judge 1 said budge. Gotta find another angle. He 1 said survive the optics forever. I forwarded it to Eleanor and George. No commentary needed. The game was getting dirty. Not smart. Dirty. That night, I sat on the motel bed and stared at Luke's photo again. The one with the cedar beam on his shoulder. She wasn't just trying to take money. She was trying to rewrite the story of who we were, to make herself the center of a house she didn't build. But here's the thing about houses. You can wallpaper over cracks. You can stage furniture and light candles and smile for the camera. But foundations don't lie. They hold or they give. And this one was holding. I wasn't the angry old man she painted me as. I was the builder, and builders don't shout. They reinforce. February 10th, 2024. Saturday, Probate Division, Courtroom 4B. The air inside that room felt heavy, like a storm crouched just outside the window waiting for a cue. People say courtrooms are sterile, but that's not true. They hold a particular kind of tension, quiet, concentrated, a mix of fear and certainty. I wore Luke's navy tie that morning, the same one he wore at his college graduation, the one he joked made him look like a discount senator. My hands were steady when I tied the knot. It wasn't about looking sharp. It was about walking into that courtroom carrying his name with me. Lauren sat across the aisle in a pearl blouse, hair swept back, face painted in that soft, curated grief she'd been selling to anyone who'd listen. Benton sat next to her, silver tie clip catching the light. A small army of spectators had trickled in, some from town, some from her curated online world, people who didn't know the story, just the performance. Eleanor stood beside me, crisp black suit, hair pinned up, no jewelry. George sat 2 rows back with Darrell. Mara was in the witness waiting area, face pale but eyes set. This was the day it all came out. Not in whispers, not in Instagram lives, in black and white, on the record, under oath. At 9 a.m. sharp, the bailiff called the docket. Callahan Trust, Probate Docket, 2024, NIS 0172. Court is now in session. The judge entered. Same rimless glasses, same deliberate step. I'd never been more grateful for a man who looked like he didn't care about headlines. Eleanor rose first. Your Honor, today we present evidence of a sustained breach of fiduciary duty by Miss Lauren Callahan, including unauthorized wire transfers, fraudulent deed filings, and attempted exclusion of a co-trustee. Benton stood too, voice smooth. We will demonstrate, Your Honor, that my client Sitt's actions were made in good faith as a grieving widow, not a malicious actor. This case is about a man who cannot let go. The judge didn't respond. He just nodded to Eleanor. Eleanor opened with the trust deed. She didn't need theatrics. She let the weight of the document speak. This trust was executed in 2011 by Luke Callahan and his father Devin Callahan, recorded, notarized, co-trustee structure with no unilateral control. That means no one can move a dollar or brick without both signatures. She handed a copy to the clerk. The judge flipped through it like he'd seen 1,000 like it, which he probably had. Then came the money. George took the stand at 9:42 a.m. The first unauthorized wire was initiated December 14th, 2023, he said. $1.2 million transferred from the trust feeder account to a Belize intermediary with no co-trustee authorization. I flagged the transaction and contacted both trustees. Eleanor. Did Miss Callahan authorize that wire? George, she initiated it. Eleanor, did Mr. Callahan? George, no. The judge made a note. Then Eleanor slid over a second set of documents, the so-called correction deed, filed December 20th. Fake, no co-trustee signature. Your Honor, she said, voice like glass. This was filed in an attempt to erase my client Sepp's ownership interest on paper. It failed, but it reveals intent. Benton tried to interject. Objection, characterization. Sustained in part, the judge said, but I see the record. Eleanor didn't miss a beat. We will also show Miss Callahan use these fraudulent filings and financial transfers to attempt a rapid liquidation of trust assets, including the house itself. At 10:15 a.m. Darrell took the stand. He wasn't polished like George. He wasn't supposed to be. He was deliberate, calm, hands folded on the rail like a man who's been on job sites his entire life. I followed Miss Callahan on multiple occasions to Harbor Cafe, he said. She met with a man we later identified as an offshore intermediary. Photographs, timestamps, receipts. He held up a photo. Lauren, black coat, silver cufflinks glinting from the man across the table. Benton objected again. Speculation. Eleanor raised the receipt. Darrell obtained through surveillance. Not speculation. Merchant record. Harbor Cafe. December 19th, 3:18 p.m. Judge admitted. Darrell nodded once, stepped down, and then came Mara. 11:03 a.m. She walked up to the witness stand like someone carrying something heavier than fear truth. Her hands trembled when she was sworn in, but when she spoke, her voice didn't waver. Lauren told me, Mara said. She said once Devon was out, she said sell everything. The house, the land, everything. Eleanor, do you recall when she said this? November 17th. Brunch at her house. She said, quote, Dedabor, once he steps out, I that'll sell everything. Dedabor had thought she was joking.
Eleanor. And now?
Marisipsa's eyes flicked toward Lauren. I know she wasn't set. Benton's cross was weak. He tried to paint Mara as bitter, but Mara had something he didn't screenshots. Invitations, dates, receipts. At 12:17 p.m., Eleanor played the recording Mara had made in January. Lauren Sepp's voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. Once he steps out, I set'll sell everything. The old man wouldn't Sepp even know what hit him. The silence that followed was the kind you can feel in your bones. Benton's face tightened like someone pulling too hard on a thread. Lauren shifted in her chair, lips pressed white. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She just said, Your Honor, this is not grief. This is strategy. Benton tried to mount one last defense. He leaned on the widow narrative like it was a crutch, but the judge had heard enough. He leaned forward, elbows on the bench, glasses low on his nose. Miss Callahan, he said, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a deliberate breach of fiduciary duty. You attempted to liquidate trust assets in violation of the controlling instrument and court order. Lauren Sepp's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. Therefore, the judge continued. The court orders the following. All trust assets are frozen pending forensic accounting. The corrective deed is void. Miss Callahan is suspended from co-trustee powers effective immediately. A court-appointed receiver will conduct an accounting. The gavel struck at 12:43 p.m. It sounded exactly like a deadbolt clicking shut. Outside, reporters were already waiting. I kept walking. I wasn't there to perform. I'd lived in the house she tried to steal. She lived in the image she'd tried to build. Eleanor walked beside me down the courthouse steps. Rain had started again, softer this time. It's not over, she said, but the hardest part is done. George came up behind us, umbrella overhead. You just won the biggest round. Darrell gave a low whistle. She looked like someone pulled the floor out from under her. I glanced at the courthouse doors. Lauren was still inside with Benton, looking small against the marble. She built her world on borrowed bricks, I said quietly. They were never hers to begin with. We crossed the parking lot. No victory music. No crowd cheering. Just the steady beat of rain on asphalt. and a single thought in my chest like a heartbeat. She locked me out of my house. But the foundation was always mine. That night, I went back to the garage. Same workbench, same smell of sawdust. I laid Luke's tie across the bench and traced the wood grain with my fingers. People talk about revenge like it's fire. It's not. It's carpentry. Slow, precise, unshakable. It's knowing which beam to reinforce and which rotten one to pull out without mercy. And in that courtroom, I hadn't burned anything down. I'd just pulled out the beam she was standing on. February 16th, 2024. Friday. Charleston rain came down slow. The kind that seeps into the ground instead of bouncing off it. I was standing on the porch again, mug of black coffee in hand, listening to the creak of the magnolia branches brushing against the window. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed structurally, but because the storm had passed through it and left me standing. Paperwork was moving behind the scenes, asset freeze orders, accounting instructions, court notices, but in the silence between the gusts of wind, all I could hear was the quiet, the kind that follows a courtroom gavel like smoke trailing after fire. Then sets when I saw the car. A white Audi, the same one Lauren had driven to Luke's funeral 2 years earlier. It pulled into the circular driveway like it had a right to. She stepped out wearing a black raincoat and sunglasses. Even though the sun was hiding, she wasn't glowing anymore. The soft, curated grief had peeled away. I didn't move. She hesitated at the gate before walking up the steps, like she was stepping onto foreign soil. And maybe she was. For the first time since December, she didn't have control of this house. Not legally, not financially, not emotionally. When she reached the top step, she took off her glasses. Her mascara was smeared, her eyes bloodshot, her hands trembled slightly. "Devin," she started. Her voice was a cracked whisper. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I just leaned against the porch post, letting the rain fill the silence for us. She hated silence. It left no room for her script. She tried again, stepping closer. "They are going to destroy me. The court. The press. Everyone. Please." The irony wasn't lost on me. Just weeks ago she'd weaponized the press like a scalpel. Now the same machine was chewing through the stories she'd built on borrowed bricks. "You did that yourself," I said finally. She flinched like I'd struck her, but I hadn't raised my voice. "I never had to. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "Lauren," I said, my voice steady, "you tried to erase me." She shook her head. I thought I could fix everything. By wiring $1 million offshore, by filing a fake deed, by lying to the world. My words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They were bricks stacking slowly around her. Tears welled, but I'd seen this movie before. She'd always been good at crying just enough. But this time something was different. She wasn't performing for a camera or a judge. She was cornered. "They said you're gonna take everything," she said, voice splintering. "The house, the money, the accounts, even the foundation shares." I raised my eyebrows. "They said you're not taking it. They said you're returning it." The wind picked up, sending rain through the screen door. I stepped aside just enough to lean my coffee mug on the porch rail. I didn't invite her in, not this time. She tried one more angle, the one that used to work on everyone else. "Devin, please, we sit family." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so tragically hollow. "Family," I repeated. "You changed the locks on me." Her lip quivered. She looked down at the porch boards, the same ones Luke and I had sanded and varnished together the summer before he died. Her shoes left wet prints on them now. They'd dry, eventually, but the stains of what she'd done wouldn't. "I said I'm sorry," she whispered. "No," I said simply. "You said you're not. You said you're scared." For a long moment, the only sound was rain hitting the magnolia leaves. "You could help me," she said finally. A last, desperate card. "Talk to Eleanor. Maybe make the judge ease up. I could still keep something." That word, keep, hit me like a sour nail. She'd always talked about keeping things. The house, the trust, the image. Never about preserving anything real. "You tried to steal my son Sed's legacy," I I said. You don't get to ask me to save you from the consequences. Her eyes filled again, this time shaking, not staged. I took a deep breath. For a brief moment, I remembered the girl Luke had brought home at 25. Nervous, laughing too loudly at the dinner table, saying she wanted a family. I don't know when that version disappeared. Maybe it was never real. She reached out, hand trembling. Devin. I stepped back. Just enough to make it clear, no. The word hung between us like a closing door. Not slammed, just final. She lowered her hand slowly. She took a few shaky breaths and glanced toward the Audi. Rain soaked her shoulders now, darkening the fabric of her coat. For the first time, she didn't look like a woman with a plan. She looked like a woman who'd run out of places to hide. They're saying I'll lose everything, she whispered again, almost to herself. You built everything on a lie, I said. That SEP's not losing. That SEP's just gravity catching up. She nodded slowly, like the weight of the words finally pressed down on her chest. Then she turned, walked down the steps, and back toward the car she'd driven like a trophy for years. She didn't look back. I watched the taillights disappear through the rain and fade down the long drive. It wasn't victory, not exactly, just quiet. Inside the house, the clock in the hallway ticked steadily, the same way it had for 20 years. Rain pattered against the kitchen window. I stood at the threshold for a long time, letting the sound settle. Revenge isn't a scream. It's the sound of silence after the storm. She'd walked away from this porch once as a conqueror. This time she walked away as someone begging at the door she'd locked herself. And I didn't even have to open it. March 3rd, 2024. Monday. Charleston mornings in early spring carry a quiet that feels earned. The storms have passed. The air smells like wet magnolia, and the ground holds that damp silence that comes after long fights. The courthouse wasn't crowded that day. No cameras, no curious faces, no whispering spectators looking for a performance. Just lawyers, clerks, and the sound of rain sliding down the windows like a slow metronome. This wasn't set a trial. This was the final order. Eleanor and I sat at the long oak table at the front of courtroom 3A. George was behind us, flipping through the final accounting documents one last time. Darrell leaned against the back wall like a man who'd spent a lifetime watching blueprints turn into buildings. Calm, steady, knowing the structure was finally solid. Lauren walked in at 9:14 a.m. Her pearls were gone. Her coat looked too big on her. She didn't have Benton this time. Just a court-appointed trustee representative trailing behind her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She didn't look at me. Maybe she couldn't set. The judge entered at 9:30 sharp. The same rimless glasses, the same even stride. But today wasn't about arguments or theatrics. Today was about signatures and ink. Case, Callahan Trust. Docket 2024 N0172. The clerk read, Final Order Hearing. Eleanor rose. Your Honor, the parties have reached a stipulated resolution in accordance with the Court SEP's prior rulings and forensic accounting review. All documents are before you. The judge nodded. Let SEP's place it on the record. Eleanor slid the first set of documents across the table. Item 1, repatriation of $1.2 million to the Callahan Family Trust, to be completed within 10 business days of this order. The judge looked over his glasses. Counsel for Miss Callahan concurs. The court-appointed trustee representative nodded. We concur. Lauren stared down at her hands, fingers white against the pen she was gripping. Eleanor continued. Item 2, complete accounting of all trust-related expenditures and transfers over the past 24 months. Item 3, permanent removal of Miss Callahan from any and all trustee functions. Item 4, full confirmation of Mr. Callahan's life estate rights in the primary residence. Item 5, attorney's fees assessed to Miss Callahan. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. Every turn of paper was a hammer strike. And item 6. Eleanor added, voice clean and even waiver of appeal in exchange for no further civil claims against Miss Callahan. The judge tapped the stack of papers gently with his gavel handle. Miss Callahan, do you understand the terms of this resolution? Lauren nodded slowly. Yes. Do you agree? Another pause. Her lips trembled. not with anger this time, but with the slow, choking weight of consequences. Yes, then sign. The clerk slid the packet to her. She uncapped the pen with shaking fingers and pressed it to the paper. Page after page, line after line, signature after signature. Her hand didn't falter, but her breath did. This was the sound of revenge without shouting. Just ink. When the papers reached me, I signed once. One line, one name. The same name etched into the beams of the house she tried to take. The judge reviewed both signatures. This court accepts the resolution. Orders are entered. Miss Callahan is hereby removed as co-trustee effective immediately. Trust control is fully vested in Mr. Callahan as surviving co-trustee. Funds are to be returned within 10 business days. Accounting to be completed under court supervision. Then, with one clean motion, the gavel came down. 10:02 a.m. That sound, the gavel, wasn't loud, but it was final. Lauren didn't cry. She just stared at the papers like they were a foreign language she used to think she could speak fluently. There were no cameras, no Instagram lives. Just the cold clarity of ink drying on legal stock. As the courtroom emptied, she stayed seated for a while, maybe trying to understand the exact moment the castle she built from lies turned to sand beneath her. Eleanor packed the folders with her usual precision. George patted my shoulder once, the quiet gesture of a man who'd watched numbers become a wall too solid to crack. She thought she was unstoppable, George said softly. But she signed it all away. Darrell let out a breath. Always the paper that gets them, not the shouting. I stood and looked at Lauren one last time. She wasn't the woman who locked me out of my house that December night. She was just a figure in a rain-soaked coat, sitting beneath fluorescent lights, realizing that the power she wielded was borrowed, and I'd taken it back with patience, not rage. Outside, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. Eleanor tucked the signed packet into her leather case, clicking the brass clasp shut. "You did it," she said. I shook my head slowly. "No, the law did." She smiled. "Just barely. You didn't let her turn it into a war. You turned it into a blueprint." We stepped out of the courthouse into the damp Charleston air. The magnolia buds were just starting to show at the edges, a reminder that seasons shift whether people want them to or not. I thought about Luke, about the house, about every nail and beam we laid down one summer after another. She'd thought she could turn that legacy into currency, but legacy doesn't live in bank accounts. It lives in what's built to last. She lost it not because I destroyed her, but because she signed it away. And that's how justice sounds sometimes. Not like a cheer, not like a fight, just the soft click of a pen. March 12th, 2024, Tuesday evening. The house breathed the way old houses do, quietly, with a creak in the floorboards, a soft hum in the walls, and a faint scent of sawdust that never really leaves when the man who built it is still alive. The magnolia outside had started to bloom, white petals against the night catching the porch light just enough to glow. I stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee, watching the branches sway. For the first time in months, I wasn't watching for headlights or sheriff's vehicles or storm clouds. Just the tree, just the house, just quiet. The living room looked exactly the way Luke and I had built it to look. The same old beams, the same lines of trim, no more fake candles. No more soft lighting meant to sell a fantasy. Just the space itself, honest, unadorned, mine. She had tried to turn this place into a stage, but now it was back to what it was always meant to be, a home. I walked into the kitchen. The oven timer sat on the counter, the same one that had dinged the night Lauren locked me out. I set it for no reason at all. The sound of the tick-tick-tick filled the room like a heartbeat. When the timer went off, the sound was soft, familiar. Not the beginning of betrayal this time, the beginning of something steadier. Luke used to sneak cookies after the timer dinged. He'd grin at me like he was doing something criminal when really he was just being a boy. I could almost see it, his barefoot steps on the tile, the chocolate smudge on his cheek. Ghosts don't have to haunt to be felt. I sat at the kitchen table and spread the legal documents Eleanor had handed me after the final order. Not because I needed to check them again. I already knew what they said. Full control of the trust. Life estate rights secured, $1.2 million returned, assets intact. But seeing it on paper made the air feel solid again. For months, Lauren had been a storm, moving fast, loud, dangerous, but storms end. Foundations don't. At 7:23 p.m., George called just to check in. Wire cleared, he said simply. Funds are back in the trust. Good, I said. You sleeping better? Like someone who doesn't have locks changed on him anymore. He laughed softly. Hell of a blueprint you drew. It was already drawn, I said. She just didn't read it. Darrell came by around 8. He leaned against the porch rail, hands in his pockets, looking out at the magnolia tree. You held the line, he said. Didn't swing wild, just stood there. I built the damn line, I replied. He grinned. She sits gonna carry this one for a long time. I don't need her to, I said. I just need the house to. After he left, I turned off the porch light and stood in the dark for a moment. It wasn't a victory dance kind of moment. It was quieter than that, better than that. The foundation under this house had been poured with my own hands. The trim carved, the roof nailed, the trust written. None of it was built for a quick sale or a flashy Instagram post. It was built to last. And it did. Lauren's name was erased from the trust documents that mattered. Her claim to the house reduced to an afterthought in legal archives. She'd walked away with nothing. I didn't lift a sword. I lifted paperwork. People think revenge is about fire, but the truth, it's about patience. Fire is loud, patience is permanent. I opened the back door and stepped into the yard. The air carried the smell of wet bark and salt from the harbor. Luke's old treehouse still stood at the back, leaning a little, like it always did. I used to worry about fixing that lean. Now I think it's perfect. Some things aren't meant to be straightened, they're meant to remind you. At 9:01 p.m. I stood at the edge of the porch, coffee mug empty, and whispered, We still here, kid. I wasn't talking to the night. I was talking to the house. To Luke, to the years behind me and the ones still left. I looked down at my hand. The brass key, my original house key, still sat on the ring. It hadn't changed. It had outlived the locks she changed, the lies she spun, and the storms she tried to bring through the door. Lauren had walked away thinking she could rewrite the story of this place. But she misunderstood something fundamental. You can't rewrite a house's story when its foundation remembers the first hands that built it. I walked back inside. The oven timer had already gone silent. The air smelled faintly of coffee and magnolia. I locked the door not because I was afraid, but because it was mine to lock. Tomorrow the lawyers would finish the trust accounting. George would send the final statements. Eleanor would close the file. But tonight wasn't about paperwork. Tonight was about the house that stayed when everything else tried to move. She thought my age made me weak. It just made me patient. April 5th, 2024. Friday afternoon. Spring had settled in like it belonged here. The magnolia tree outside was in full bloom now, petals brushing the porch steps like soft white snow. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. I'd spent the morning tightening a few bolts on the porch rail, not because it needed it, but because it felt good to work with my hands again. The storm was over, the paperwork done. The trust was mine to manage without anyone breathing down my neck. The house had gone back to being a house, not a battlefield, not a stage, not an asset in someone else's performance. Just home. I was sorting mail at the kitchen table when I saw it. A single bent postcard wedged between a stack of bank statements and an advertisement for pest control. No return address, just a Florida postmark. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lauren Sips. I turned it over slowly. There were only 3 words. You were right. That was it. No apology, no plea, no performance. Just 3 words written in a hand that used to sign fake deeds and wire authorizations, now reduced to ink on a cheap postcard. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd built a whole war on paper, and in the end she surrendered on paper too. I set the postcard on the table next to the legal folder Eleanor had returned to me after closing the trust case. Every document in that folder was clean, final, irreversible. Her signature no longer meant control. it meant concession. I picked up the postcard, turned it over one more time, and walked to the backyard. The grass was damp but warm, the kind of spring air that carries a little salt from the harbor. Luke's treehouse still leaned just slightly, stubborn as ever. I stood under it like I had when he was 12, listening to him tell stories from the top floor like it was a fortress. I lit a match. The flame caught fast. Paper burns quick, even when it carries weight. I let the postcard curl and blacken between my fingers before dropping it into the fire pit. A thin wisp of smoke spiraled upward, vanishing into the soft blue sky. It wasn't rage. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. Quiet. Final. I didn't keep her words. She didn't deserve a place in the house she tried to take. Inside, the oven timer dinged. I hadn't set it for anything important. I just liked the sound now. It no longer marked the night she locked me out. It marked every night she failed to take it away. I walked back in and poured myself a cup of coffee. The afternoon sun cut through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes in the air like gold. The brass key sat on the counter next to the mug. My key, the one that had outlived every lie she told. I thought about how quiet it had gotten since the hearings ended, how no one called my name on courthouse steps, how no one whispered about trust deeds or wire transfers. Just silence, real silence. Some people think revenge is about making someone hurt, but real revenge isn't about screaming, it's about taking back what they thought they could steal and living in it without flinching. Lauren was in Florida now. That's what George told me when the final accounting cleared. She'd sold the Audi, defaulted on 2 business loans, and moved into a rental somewhere along the Gulf Coast. She wasn't a headline anymore. Just another person learning that borrowed power runs out fast. She once said, "He one set survived the optics forever." But here I was, sitting at the kitchen table with sunlight on the floorboards. Luke and I laid down together. No optics, no show, just the foundation. At 6:11 p.m., I took a slow walk through the house. Every step I took had a sound I knew by heart. The creak near the pantry, the soft groan in the hallway, the hum in the vent above the stairs. Those sounds belonged to me again, to no one else. People ask sometimes why I didn't tear the house down, start fresh, build something new, but that's the thing. They don't understand. You don't burn down what holds your history. You reinforce it. You let it outlast the people who tried to take it. Lauren's war was fast, loud, chaotic. My response was patient, built brick by brick, signature by signature, like a man who understands foundations better than storms. And in the end, storms pass. Foundations stay. I sat back down at the kitchen table and reached for my mug. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but it didn't matter. Outside, the wind moved through the magnolia leaves. The oven timer ticked faintly. Luke's laughter lived somewhere in those beams, and I could hear it now, not like a ghost, but like a memory that finally had space to breathe. This wasn't set revenge anymore. It was restoration. She thought she could make me disappear. But all she really did was give me back everything she'd tried to steal. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. And I took myself back.